I've received my Vevor vacuum pump and pressure pot, and I'm going to show you how I set this up today. Now this is a Vevor 1 horsepower 12 CFM cubic feet per minute vacuum pump. It's the larger pump, but I wanted to have plenty of power and quick response. So I got this vacuum pump from Vevor, and it comes everything nicely packaged in styrofoam, and I didn't have a problem anywhere with the packaging or the transport. It came fine. So I opened up the vacuum pump instruction manual, and if you haven't had the pleasure of reading a Vevor vacuum, any kind of a Vevor instruction manual, they're virtually worthless except for showing pictures of the parts and a list of the parts for replacement. Very little for instruction, and it doesn't really explain all the things that come in the boxes. So, but that's part of Vevor's charm. All right. So what comes is 2 bottles of high-performance vacuum pump oil. You don't want to use any other kind of oil. There are other types of vacuum pumps, but they all use basically the same kind of oil. Okay, styrofoam top came off. Now what's inside is the vacuum hose that connects the pump to the pressure pot, not pressure pot, the vacuum pot, and power cord. Okay, so I'm going to take this pump out of the box and put it back on the bench. All right. So here's the basic pump, the oils, and the parts. And I'll explain what these things are. This is where the power cord plugs in, and it's a 3-prong plug-in, just like a computer. And then the off-on switch for the pump. It has this little red filler valve. This is where you put your pump oil in. And then the vacuum side has 2 fittings. One goes vertical, one goes horizontal. So you can choose which way the hose comes off of your pump. Then this is your exhaust filter right here. And it has on top a little plug. The little yellow sticker says, remove cap before operating. Pop. If you don't remove it before you turn the pump on, it'll blow that little cap right up to the ceiling. Then it'll be someplace in your shop. Make sure you take that cap off. All right. Now, like I said, I filled this pump with oil. You unscrew this cap, and I took a little funnel, I put it in the hole, and I poured the entire contents of this bottle, which appears to be 450 milliliters, 500 milliliters to the top. Fill it completely. Pull the funnel, put the cap back on. Of all the important steps in this entire process of setting up the pump is making sure you put the oil in. If you fail to put oil in and run this pump, it will ruin it. Power cord. And this is the 3-prong power cord you've probably seen before. And it goes on the back here. So, and then this end goes to your typical 110 volt. Then the hose, I will choose the vertical fitting for the hose. So, good and snug. And these are knurled knobs. So these, as you can tell, these are for finger tightening only, no wrench. Okay, once the hose is installed, power's plugged in, oil into the compressor of the pump, and the plug is out, the guy can start it and run it. So that's it. It's not very loud, and so we'll shut it off, and then we're ready to assemble the pressure pot, or the vacuum pot. The vacuum pump has been assembled and tested, runs fine. Now it's time to open and assemble the vacuum pot. The top comes wrapped in bubble wrap, and it is thick glass, very nice, with a seal on the top, made of silicone. It's nice. We'll set this aside for a minute. This is the gauge and the valves. This comes with a nut and two silicone or rubber fittings that go inside the glass. Okay, the gauge is a liquid-filled gauge that goes from 0 to 30 inches of mercury. The red scale on the inside is in bars, but we don't use those. We use inches of mercury on the outside. Then the gauge goes from 0 to 30 inches of mercury. And if you remember high school physics, the way you measure barometric pressure is you take a bowl of mercury and you put a glass tube into the mercury, freestanding, and you start pumping out the vacuum on the top. And when you reach a full vacuum, the mercury will rise in the tube to a level that is equivalent to the barometric pressure. So at sea level, you'll get nearly 30 inches of mercury. But as you rise in elevation, because we're at about 3,000 feet, for about every 1,000 feet, you lose an inch of mercury. So we're going to be pulling maybe 27 inches of mercury. Now the gauge has a little thing on the top here that says, cut the nipple off. And so there's a little rubber nipple on top. And I cut that off with a pair of scissors, and it bled a little glycerin or whatever the liquid is, but not much. Okay, so this is ready then to put into the lid. Now it comes with a little plastic bag of stuff. It has an extra filter here for the inlet on the vacuum tube. It's got a rubber ring that the instructions don't explain, but and it's got this pad. Looks like a very nice pad, but again, there's no description or explanation about what this is or what it does. So I just use it to put the pot on. It also comes with a little wrench used to tighten the nut onto the glass lid. So here's the pot. Nice stainless steel, well polished, nice ring around the top where the seal will meet the top. Little pad here on the wood, pot on. Now we're ready to assemble the lid. So what you do first is you take the nut off, and the washer, and the little rubber seal for the pot side. The gauge side stays on. You don't need to take that off. Okay, you can insert the gauge into the hole. And then the rubber part goes into the hole from the tank side. Just rotate it around a couple of times to make sure that it's in good and flush. And the washer goes on the top. And then the nut. A little wrench to tighten. Just going to take a paper towel and wipe this silicone seal and the top of the tank. Then you set the tank on, or set the lid on the tank, and then you just go around and make sure by feel that it's about in the center of the top. The lid is on the center of the tank. It feels pretty good. All right, now our vacuum hose comes from the pump. And screws into the fitting on the lid. And again, finger tight. So, and the inlet is open, and I'll open the vacuum side, and I'll turn the pump on, and what I'm looking for is for the vacuum to pump to suck all the air out of the tank and then go into a vacuum. So I'm watching on the gauge for that to start indicating a vacuum. Okay, open, and we turn the pump on. And that little plug popped right off, but it landed right here on the table. I wonder how many times I'm going to do that. Okay, so it's pulling, vacuum is pulling air out of the tank, but the inlet is still open. I'm going to close that. And let the pump pull all the air out of the tank. And the pump runs at 12 cubic feet per second, which means that it pulls 12 cubic feet, or 12 cubic feet per minute. Now you see the vacuum gauge is starting to go up. Watching the gauge on the outside. Coming up to 15 inches of mercury at the top. Headed over. You might be able to see that there's a little bit of smoke coming out of the filter at the back. A little bit of smoke. It's odorless and it's not offensive, but you can definitely see that the pump is using some oil. Okay, we're just about at 25 inches of mercury. More smoke coming out of the exhaust. There are little spatters of oil around the exhaust filter, and there was a little bit of the glycerin on top of the meter that I just wiped off. Just checking the fittings. So we should theoretically be able to pull 27 inches of mercury at this altitude. Okay, we've reached 27 inches of mercury on the gauge. So I have the inlet shut off and the vacuum shut off. This tank should retain that vacuum for a long period of time. I'll see how long it goes. I'm assuming this little blue plug is a dust cap for the exhaust because this is all oil in here. I'll put that dust cap back on, and it was a lot of fun watching it pop off and land back down on my table. Okay, that's how the whole setup works. I'm very pleased with Vevor. I think it's a pretty well-made system. So the pump and the vacuum pot, the gauges, the valves, the switches, everything seemed to be just fine. Pretty nice, actually. So I'm pleased with it. So now that I've shown you how I've set this thing up, I'm going to shut off the camera and go back to drying wood. And when the wood is dry, we'll pour in some cactus juice and put it in the pot, and then we'll go through that process, which is a process of applying the vacuum and watching the bubbles foam out and making sure that the bubbles don't overtop the container. You can adjust that by letting in a little air from time to time until it stabilizes, then you can leave it walk away. Anyway, we'll see how long this holds 27 inches of mercury. Okay, here I have a selection of wood that's ready to go into the dryer. After they get dried, then they will go into the vacuum chamber and get infused with cactus juice. But first, in order to make sure that they dry, I am going to weigh each piece so that I can tell I'll give it like 24 hours to dry, and then I'll go weigh them again and check to see how much weight was lost. Now I'm going to set the scale to kilograms because this particular scale only gives me pounds, and I don't want to go in tenths of pounds. I need it more accurate than that, so we'll go kilograms. So here's a piece of redwood that will weigh. It's 55 kilograms. So I'll write right on it. 55.0 to start. Here's another piece. 173. 173.0 on that piece. This one. 174. So write 174.0 kilograms. And next, this is rough wood. This is 104. 104.0. And this one. It's 132.0. I just put the 0.0 on there so that I can tell that it's 132, not 13.2. There's another rough piece. This is 95.0. Here's a very dense piece of dark wood. We'll see how this goes. This is 115, so 115.0. These are hard to see on this dark wood like this, but we'll see how that goes. There's another piece of that dark wood. It's 113.0. These are rough. 104.0. Another piece of rough. It's 98.0. Okay, all the pieces of wood have been measured. And so we'll shut off the scale, move the wood out of the way. And this will demonstrate the oven that I'm using and why I chose it. This is a Hamilton Beach toaster oven. And I chose it because it's a rubber band to hold the plug. But I chose it because it's simple. It has a temperature dial on the top that runs from 150 to 400 degrees, 450 degrees. Then it has a function, bake, broil, and toast, because it has elements on the bottom and elements on the top. So if you do bake, all 4 elements run. If you do toast, only the top elements run. And then it has a timer down here that goes from 0 to 30 minutes, but I need it to go all the time because I'm going to run this 24 hours. So this particular toaster oven that I chose has an option to go on all the time. So full on all the time. That's good. All right, it's a very simple oven. Nice, easy open and close. It has a drip pan, and I use an oven thermometer because you can't go by a mechanical adjustment for your temperature. To be precise, you have to have an oven thermometer. Okay, so there's a drip pan that goes in the bottom. There's a wire rack that goes on that, and then there's a safety pan that goes on the bottom just in case everything leaks. Nice feature. There. You can see the curve on the top here is because it was designed as a pizza oven. This is so that you can get a full pizza inside. Okay, and I set this on a lower rack, and I put the wood in the pan. No, I don't either. I'm not going to use the pan. I'm going to just simply set the wood inside, standing up, so that there's a ½ inch or so separation between the pieces. And that'll give me better. I gotta set it up. I think I could use the pan. Why not? It doesn't need that much air on the bottom. So. So here's all my wood on the pan. instantly. Okay, so there's a full load on pan. Slowly back in. I'll put my thermometer right in front so I can see it. Through the glass. Close it, and I set it to about 190 degrees on the dial. I set it to bake because I want all 4 elements to run, and then I turn it to full on, and I let that run now for about a day, and then we'll see as time goes by. I'll weigh the pieces to see how much weight they're losing. When the weight is completely as little as I can get, it's as dry as it can be, then I'll pull that wood out and wrap it in saran wrap right away when it's about as hot as I can stand, to prevent the wood from sucking in any of the atmospheric moisture before it goes into the vacuum pot. I was able to find out why I couldn't get vacuum. The nut down here just was not quite tight enough. So I took it apart, put it back on, tightened it down. Now we're pulling vacuum. The inside range of the vacuum gauge is in bars. It's the outside ring that's in inches of mercury. It's coming up pretty quickly to 25 inches of mercury. Quite a lot of smoke coming out of the exhaust on the pump. That's 25 inches of mercury. I can just remember my old high school class on barometric pressure, watching the mercury rise in the tube to 25 inches, headed to 30. Now, of course, as you go up in the elevation, the barometric pressure drops, and so you can't get a full 30 inches of mercury. At this elevation, and we're about 3,000 feet, the mercury may not get much higher than about 27. It's at 26 inches now. And it has pretty much stabilized and leveled off at about 27 inches of mercury. I think at this altitude in Whitefish, Montana, it's not going to pull much more vacuum. Now, I ran the pump for almost a half an hour. And as I look at the level, it pulled down maybe one level mark on the gauge. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 marks. There's a middle mark, and then 2 marks above and 2 marks below. So it's down to the first mark. So it has used some oil in that 15 or 20 minute session. All right, so we have let the wood dry. And this was just a test to see how quickly it would dry. And it looks like the original test piece, 173 grams, was put in the furnace or in the oven last night at 7:30 p.m. I let it go all night, and then at 8 o'clock in the morning I weighed it at 156 grams. Then I weighed it again at 12 and again at 2:30, and it stabilized at 156 grams, which was, it went from 100% to 90% in wood weight. So 10% of the weight of the material was water, and that was boiled off. Cool. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take the wood out of the oven, which is still fairly hot, and wrap it in saran wrap to seal it against moisture. So each piece that comes out is wrapped in saran wrap. And I've weighed them after I took them out of the oven and wrapped them in saran wrap. I weighed them, and I see they have picked up no moisture. They're exactly the same weight. Wood is all dried and cool, and I'm going to start stacking it into the bucket. So, piece at a time. This bucket is what the Cactus Juice resin will go into. And I've re-weighed each one of these blocks, and none of them have gained any weight at all since they came out of the oven. And wrapping them with something like this, I have not seen anyone else do it. I'm not sure why. It seems to work slick. So I'll just continue doing it until I find a reason not to. It sure keeps the moisture off this wood. I've got the wood stacked in there, and I have 3 weights that I've used over the years. These are weights that I cast my bullets from when I was hand loading a lot. So I'll put 3 of these weights on there. Like so. I have my Cactus Juice mixed. This bucket will fit into the chamber. Now we have all the wood stacked into the bucket. We have weights on top, 3 lead weights from hand loading. And ready to go into the pressure pot vacuum chamber. In they go. Cactus Juice is mixed. Okay, it's all in there. The wood is covered by about 1 inch of liquid. Now we're ready for the vacuum. Alrighty. Set the lid on. Check it to make sure it's centered. Turn the valve off on the inlet, and we'll start the pump. sure the fittings are tight. Take the little plug off of the exhaust and start her up. Plug it into power. Start her up. I will slowly open the vacuum. The vacuum is starting to increase. Watching the foam come out inside. I'm going to let a little air in, tamp down the foam. Coming up to 25 inches of mercury on this gauge. The bubbles are active, but they're not too extreme. We're at 26 inches of mercury. Just about 27 inches of mercury. And 27 inches is as much as we can pull at 3,000 feet elevation. I'm going to turn the vacuum valve off just to see how much it will hold. It's holding at 27 inches, so I think I can shut off the pump for a while. It's still degassing air out of the woods, but the vacuum is holding at about 27 inches. Now I will probably let this run at 27 inches for maybe 4 to 5 hours. It has been nearly 6 hours since I started the vacuum on this pot, and I can see with a flashlight that there are tiny bubbles still coming off 1 or 2 of the pieces of wood, but I think it's probably pretty much as far as it's going to go. So I'm going to open the air now and let the pressure out. It held steady at 27 inches of mercury for 5 hours, so the pot itself is very successful. Now, as I let the pressure out, then the resin will start to suck into the wood, and the level of the cactus juice is going to fall. And I'm very close to the surface of a couple of these pieces of wood, so I'm going to try to quickly turn these wood pieces over on their side in the cactus juice as it's beginning to absorb the fluid into the wood. So I'll see how successful I am at doing that. The wood still feels fairly buoyant, but I've pressed the wood down into the bucket. So we'll leave the wood soaking in the cactus juice for probably a couple of days, I would imagine, to give it plenty of time for the wood to pull that cactus juice into its pores. The wood has been soaking in the resin juice for about 2 days. It's time to pull it out, put it in the rack, and put it in the oven to bake and cure. These are the lead weights from hand loading that I use to weigh down the wood. Just gonna hand squeegee the resin. Blocks are not floating in the resin anymore. That's good. They feel quite heavy compared to how they felt going in. I'm going to bake these for a considerable amount of time. They say you bake them twice as long as you soaked them, but in this case it will probably be less than that because I soaked them for 48 hours. I don't think I needed to do that, but I did. Soaked them 48 hours. All right. Let's see how able I am to pick this rack up and put it into the oven without knocking the wood off. I have this pan. This is the bottom pan of the oven. And I just covered it with aluminum to catch the majority of drips. Just so you can see the location, the wood. I put the wood on the rack and I put the rack on the bottom spot for the racks. Okay, I'm gonna close it. Start it. And I have it set for 200 degrees. Well, I really want to get it just above 190 to 200. So I've got it set. I'll come back and check as it warms up. Forgot I want to put in this oven thermometer. So I can monitor the temperature. What that leaves is the container of cactus juice. It has taken really quite a lot of the cactus juice into the wood. So I started with a full gallon, and I've got to order another gallon just so the next batch I can top it up. But then I'm going to pour this extra cactus juice back into the gallon bottle it came from. Because it's activated and it'll last a year or so if I keep it cool in the garage. The wood has been in the oven about 5 minutes, and you can see that it is smoking. And I'll show you how much of the cactus juice was used for this batch of wood. So that's the cactus juice returned to the 1 gallon jug. And I suppose about a quart or quart and a half of the cactus juice went into the wood. Everyone probably has their own system, but the way I keep the inside of my vacuum chamber clean is just paper towel and Windex. Now, I just pulled the wood out of here and it had a little splatter on the inside, but I lined the pot with the bottom third of a 5 gallon bucket. I cut that off, drop it in, sinks to the bottom. That will catch most everything that slops over the side. The bucket I use for my samples, the bucket I use for my wood, is just an extra bucket I had in the shop. And I just trimmed off the edges so that they would fit right inside this 5 gallon bucket. Maybe an overkill, but it's a way of keeping things nice and clean. So my actual wood and resin goes in this tan bucket, and that goes inside the 5 gallon bucket. This is the kind of bucket that I cut off about, maybe 2/3 of the way to go into the vacuum chamber. All right, so the funnel, my weights, and everything cleaned up nicely with just soap and water. So the resin, before it cures, is very easy to clean up. The oven has been running now about 20 minutes, and I'm trying to monitor the temperature inside the wood, but it's so moist that it fogs the glass. It's about 190, so I'm going to raise the temperature just a little bit. And I'll come back and check. You can see every time the heat kicks on, we get a little smoke coming out of there. But it's not stinky, but you can definitely see the smoke rising. After 7 hours of drying in the oven at 200 degrees, I pulled the wood out and we had a pretty successful session of infusion. I have one test piece that weighed 173 grams before drying, and then 156 grams after drying. And then after the resin was infused, it was 295 grams, which was a 122 gram increase in weight. So the water was pulled out, the resin was infused, and we had good success. Interestingly, I had 2 pieces of redwood, and redwood is a very soft wood. And the redwood did take up a lot of resin. The weight when we started was 55 grams. And after infusion, it was 134 grams. That's a 99 gram increase in weight. And that's resin that's inside and dried. So that's a pretty heavy uptake. I took these blocks out of the resin after cooking them in cactus juice and drying them, and I've sanded off each face a little just so that I can get a flat surface. Now these measure about 6/10 of an inch, and I want 0.4. It measures 0.64, and I want 0.4 when I'm done. So I'm going to mill off 0.1 from each side. Now I have a 2-inch cutter disc, cutter bit on my mill. And so I'm going to put my wood into the mill and tighten it down. So, then I'm going to take 0.1 inches off of each side. So I'm going to get my PPE on here. So that's a nice 100. We did. It'll be a nice pattern in the wood when I'm finished. It only took 1,000th off, but it gives me a nice flat surface. Okay, I'm going to clean up the mill, and then I'll flip it over and do the other side. Okay, this is milling stabilized wood, and it's almost just like cutting plastic. Very homogeneous, consistent. It planes out nicely, it sands nicely. Now let me put a little alcohol on there to bring out the wood grain. Alcohol. So that's going to be a very nice and pretty piece of wood. Here are the two hard pieces of infused wood that I ran in through the mill. I milled them down to 400 thousandths, and they get a little shine from the light up above, but you can see the grain and the pattern in the wood. If I could just get a better angle with light. Anyway, there you go.